evening, everybody. Welcome to our first digital leadership series of the event of the academic year. My name is Vijay Gurbaksani, and I'm the director of the Center for Digital Transformation. I am delighted that all of you can be here with us today. For those of you who are here for the first time, the Digital Leadership Series is our center's forum for a conversation about the societal and macroeconomic consequences of digital technologies. We consider such themes as the impact of technology on our attention spans, which was our last event at the end of last year, and on the productivity impact of these technologies, and many more themes, most of which are listed on our website. Today, we have the privilege of speaking to Simon Johnson, who's a professor at the MIT Sloan School of Management. And I'll introduce him in a minute, and we're going to dig deeper into the economic impacts of technology. And we're going to go beyond just the productivity impacts and whether the technology pays off, but really we're going to look at for whom it pays off or doesn't pay off. But first, I'd like to acknowledge support from our benefactors, KPMG and the Beal Family Foundation, which allows us to offer these programs to you at no cost. Our aspiration at the center is to elevate the conversation on complex digital themes, so we can all be better informed as we contribute our voices to the broader discussion. And let me say this, with the transformative potential of AI and as much discussion as we're having in our country and in Europe, for example, the president issued an executive order a couple of days ago. The countries are meeting at Bletchley Park in England, literally as we speak. Everybody's trying to figure out what the future of our country, of society holds in a world that is rapidly being transformed by AI. So I think it's just really important for all of us to contribute our voices so we can get the society and the country we want for ourselves and our children. In terms of structure, I'm going to engage Simon in a conversation for about 25 or so minutes, and then we will turn it over to the audience. The chat function has been disabled, so we're going to use the Q&A feature. So about 20 minutes, and please feel free to start typing in your questions into the Q&A feature. I'll moderate and Simon will answer your questions. With that, let me introduce Simon Johnson. He's a professor of entrepreneurship at the MIT Sloan School of Management, where he heads the Global Economics and Management Group. He has served as the chief economist at the International Monetary Fund. He's also on the board of Fannie Mae, among many other external roles. We're here today to talk about his findings and insights from his new book with his MIT colleague, Daron Acemoglu. The book's called Power and Progress, A 1,000-Year Struggle Over Technology and Prosperity. I read it a couple of times now as I got ready for this event, and it is an extraordinarily important book. It traced the impact of technologies from the agricultural age through the machine age, all the way through now. And the central question of the book, as I understand it, is whether the gains from technology have been widely shared or whether they've accrued to the few rather than the many. And what factors might explain the difference in how these gains are distributed across the various segments of the population. This book couldn't come at a more important time. And so I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And with that, let's get started. Simon, welcome to the Digital Leadership Series at the Center for Digital Transformation at UC Irvine. We're delighted that you can join us.
It's a great honor to be with you.
Thank you. So with that, let's just jump right into it. I've sort of introduced very broadly the broad theme of the book, and I hope I got that right. What motivated you and Daron to actually write this book?
Well, Vijay, actually, we guessed a couple of years ago that further technological transformations in our future, and we had some inkling that AI would be part of that. And we wanted to go back and look into history and into economic history and see what lessons are relevant to today, particularly because we're concerned that sometimes people get too, particularly in this country, in the kind of society that you and I work in, people get too optimistic about too much assumption that technology will necessarily and always be good for everyone. We wanted to break that down. We want to look historically, find some comparison relevant, and also try and tease out some potential policy implications and some lessons or thoughts that people like you and your audience might benefit from.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'll have to confess that there was a time not so long ago, perhaps 10 years ago, when I was we host an annual conference at the center, and I was initially rah-rah technology. You really need to embrace it because it promises a great future. But in the last few years, we've all become a lot more guarded, because I think technology has finally achieved the scale at which it is having a very material impact on a lot of factors that are bigger than the companies that are actually applying the technology. And certainly we see what's happening within the tech sector. But let's dig a little deeper into what you just said was your motivation. So the title of the book, as I said, is Power and Progress, a 1,000-year struggle over technology and prosperity. So let's walk through those terms. What is power and what do power and progress really mean? What's progress? I think I get, but power, I'm curious to hear. And then what is this 1,000-year struggle that you're talking about?
Well, the 1,000-year struggle is basically that technology can be good for everyone, or it can just be good for a few people. So when we invent things in the Middle Ages or the Industrial Revolution or today, who has the power? Who's deciding what progress is? And who's sharing the benefits of higher productivity or different features of the organizational production that you get from the technology? So who's in charge and who's influencing and shaping the direction of technology? That's what really interests us over this 1,000-year span.
And I know when you talk about progress, you're not just talking about GDP growth, you're talking about sort of the distributional gains from technology. Too often we tend to reduce it just to, what are our GDP productivity growth numbers looking like and things like that.
Absolutely, including what's the effect on health, what's the effect on people's families, what's the effect on their quality of life. I mean, all of these things are important. Economists like GDP. It is a very simple measure, and there's a lot of information in GDP, but it's not enough to evaluate where we are today, what happens next, or any of these previous technological revolutions.
Yeah, in fact, the last speaker we had at the end of last year was really talking about the impact on our mental health of social media, which I was actually smiling when I read the book or listening to one of your earlier sessions where you said something like there are technologies that aren't particularly contributing to GDP growth or productivity, and you listed social media as one of those, and I'm like nodding my head along. And and unfortunately, in the case of younger people, for example, there's increasing evidence that it can be harmful actually. So, but we'll hold that aside. But let's, if you don't mind, let's do this chronologically. Like I think there's a lot of lessons. I like the work that economic historians do. So let's go back all the way to the agricultural age and sort of how would you characterize technological progress in that era and how did that play out?
Well, if we can go back a long way, of course, we can go back 50,000 years, we can go back 12,000 years to when humans first settled agriculture. And of course, there were episodes of technological improvement, including the first agriculture and the kinds of empires that were built on them. But it's very hard to say that people's lives improved, either when they moved from being hunter-gatherers to being settled farmers, or as those various farming civilizations improved. In fact, the evidence we have that's clearest is from the Middle Ages, so the earliest period in Western Europe we focus on in the book, so that's about 1,000 years ago, where we can see definite evidence that technology changed. There were water mills, there were windmills, there were other improvements in agricultural technology. The elite did better. The elite had enough money to build massive cathedrals, for example, but the living conditions of most people barely moved at all, even as the technology improved. And then when a big shock came along, which we know as the Black Death, they were massively unprepared for that because they were malnourished, they had terrible housing, and the consequences were a third of them died in many European countries.
I think that's an interesting sort of way to look at it, because a lot of the way the story's been told and the readings that I've done in the past have really been that this was a period of not very much economic growth. And I think what you're saying is actually there was a fair amount of economic growth, but it just didn't manifest in an equitable way.
Yeah, there was a lot of technology change and a lot of technology improvements. There was some economic growth, as in overall GDP or even GDP per capita, but it wasn't shared with 80 or 90% of the people. So I think that's how we would characterize that 300-year period, for example.
Yeah, and I think to your point about power, I mean, I'm from India, clearly, and sort of you see the difference in power even in a country like that between sort of, the sharecroppers and the capital and the owners of capital, which is land and machinery. And there was clearly hugely disparate gains between these different segments of the population. And
absolutely, but also remember, Vijay, the British impact on India was for a long time to deindustrialize it. So Indian textiles were much better, cotton textiles certainly much better than anyone else's, and the British were deeply envious, and they managed to arrange the division of labor so that India produced the raw cotton, the spinning and the weaving was done in England, and then cloth was sold back to India, all under colonial arrangements. And that deindustrialized and shifted the power within Indian society substantially. And I think you still see some of the consequences of that today.
Yeah, it's so funny because there was a train station I used to stop at called Cotton Green when I was going to college, and I never quite realized what the history was until I read it recently. But you're absolutely right about that. So then we get to the Industrial Revolution, and you actually in the book distinguish between sort of I don't know if this is fair, but the earlier and later phases of the Industrial Revolution, and you see real differences between. Let's start with obviously the earlier phase, and then what happened then in terms of technology and economic and progress as your terminology of choice.
Right. So the early phase of the Industrial Revolution is important, particularly because there's a general assumption, including today, that if you improve productivity, that boosts the demand for workers, that boosts wages, and then everybody gains quite quickly. It turns out that last part, quite quickly, doesn't fit the historical record. So cotton spinning was mechanized in the 1780s. The weaving of cotton was mechanized from the early 1800s. These were really big transformations in productivity. But if you look at the wages of people working in the cotton sector or around the north of England, or in coal mines, which were also caught up in a boom in the level of activity, there's very little improvement in wages. Living standards almost certainly actually get worse for many people. Working hours are much longer. Health is worse. And we have well-documented cases. I mean, there were royal commissions that demonstrated beyond any reasonable doubt that children as young as 6 were working underground in coal mines in the 1840s, pushing carts with their head in the pitch black for 12 hours a day. So that's 60 years, Vijay, after this early industrial revolution really started and technology was really transformed. So I think it's fair to ask the question, why did it take so long? And then if you think about AI today, which I know we're going to come on to, but if somebody says, well, don't worry, AI will cause some transitional problems, but everyone's going to benefit eventually, I think all of us should push on this word eventually, because if it's 60 years again, that's way too long. I don't think that would be acceptable to anyone.
Right. No, I think that's a really important point. So first of all, that visual of a child, pushing whatever it was with their heads is really awful. But even before AI, and you write about this in the book, we've been promised the productivity payoff from technology. Like every year it becomes like, give it another few years because, this is a transformative general purpose technology and these things take time. But to your point, I mean, at some point they have to arrive because you can't keep saying that, let's wait another 30 years or whatever the case might be. And so so we really need to think about how we structure our deployment of this technology in ways that sort of yield quicker returns in meaningful ways. But let's go back to the Industrial Revolution. And I know sort of the way you describe the post-war period, the post-Second World War period in your book is an optimistic period for American industry, probably European industry more broadly, and had a better result for broader segments of the population, for many segments of the population.
Well, that's right. So there's a transformation in fortunes from the mid-19th century, some people would say from the 1870s. This coincides with the rise of the United States as industrial power, and it also coincides with or brings with it a change in who benefits from industrialization in Western Europe. So there's much more broadly shared prosperity by the early 1900s, and you're quite right that in the post-World War II period, there's a 30-year period, 30 years where almost everyone, not absolutely everyone to be fair or clear, but almost everyone gains in those West European, North American societies. And they gain because productivity increases, and that does increase the demand for labor, and that does push up their wages. So we have sometimes in the past had the right combination of conditions for everyone to benefit from technological change. So
one of the examples that I've actually written about in a completely different context, is about Henry Ford and the Ford Motor Company, with all the appropriate caveats about Henry Ford, the individual. Walk us through that example. I found that example really compelling because I think it tells a really nice story about how we can think about the problems we face. Our audience is mainly people who deploy, executives who deploy technology at their organizations. And I think these choices that we make are very, very important. So if you could explain that, that would be very helpful.
Right. So when Henry Ford arrived in Detroit and started in the car business, the American car industry produced about 2,400 cars a year, so 1,900. And these are all handcrafted cars, very expensive. So Ford did two things. He brought car production onto an assembly line and he brought electricity to the assembly line. Both of these things were profoundly transformational in terms of productivity and the organization of work. By the late 1920s, there were 400,000 people working in the US car industry. Ford made 1.5 million cars a year, and so did General Motors. The key point, Vijay, is that while Henry Ford automated some parts of the production process, he clearly automated. He brought machines in to do things that previously humans had done. That's automation. At the same time, he and all the people around him, this big new class of manager engineers, they designed and developed and found the need for new tasks for people to do. So some tasks were automated away, but a lot of new tasks were created. And these new tasks involved expertise. Expertise means somebody is doing something for you on the shop floor or upstream or downstream of your car industry that they have some skills for, and you can't just go out and hire somebody else and next day they can do the job, right? They built up some specific human capital or they have some technical expertise. And it's because they have that expertise, you have to pay them a premium wage. That's what we're looking for in successful industrial or technological transformations. And remember also, Vijay, that while the benefits were shared in part because of the market mechanism of paying high wages I just described, there was also a very strong union movement. And there were also big strikes in the 1930s. And the point of those strikes was, hey, you've got these productivity gains, you've got these big profits, share it with the workers. And they prevailed to some extent. And that was the principle of the post-World War II US car industry. And that was a rising tide that lifted all boats in that industry for a while, but 30 years is quite a long while.
Yeah, but when I read that example, and I actually did some more research on that example because it really sort of caught my attention. I mean, Ford got a lot of things right. They invested in skills development, which is very much the conversation we're having today. So it was less about laying people off than sort of trying to get them ready to work with the new machines. I had a conversation just this morning with somebody who is on the board of several public companies. And one of the things that she shared with me was this is what they're dealing with literally every day, which is you've got all of these employees with domain specific skills, but there's only a few of them who are digital savvy or even fewer AI savvy. And you can't let all this collective know-how go, just exit the door. And how do you actually leverage the technology in a way that A, they're ready for, but B, augments what it is they do, augments their capabilities versus replace their capabilities. We'll get back to that in much greater detail, but is that sort of the right take on what you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, that's the punchline of the book, Vijay, exactly, which is AI can go you can go either way, in our view. It could either be an automation technology. So self-checkout kiosks in grocery stores would be an example. They're not very, it doesn't enhance productivity very much, but you're definitely replacing people. And that's not even a sophisticated AI approach. But some fast food chains are talking about replacing all the people involved in taking the orders from customers. So you just have people running the kitchen, I suppose. Alternatively,
well, we've got robots there too now. So
exactly. Alternatively, AI could be human augmenting, human complementary. So the examples there we have so far are in customer service. So instead of replacing a customer service agent with a bot of some kind, you provide real-time advice and input to the human customer service respondent, and they then share that with and help filter that and decide how to use that information with the person who has the problem. And the early indications from the few careful studies we have of that are very encouraging. It's that the AI helps people who don't have a lot of skill, don't have a lot of experience. It raises their job satisfaction and it makes the customer happier.
Right. I think you said in the book, but if you take somebody who's well-trained, making a decent wage, and you replace that person's skills with AI, that person's value to the company quickly approaches zero. But if you can increase their value to the company by augmenting what they do, I mean, if you buy the theory of so you get paid your marginal product, then in fact, these people get paid more, which is, I think, the situation we're trying to go for.
One CEO said to me in a session on Monday that he had a new HVAC, an air conditioning system, put in his house with a lot of technology in it, and the HVAC technician was a little older, wasn't very up in technology, had to come out 4 times, VJ, because he didn't quite know how to set the system. If that technician had the right co-pilot, to use a word,
Yep.
advisor, AI advisor, it would have just been 1 visit. So that saves the company money. That's an improvement in productivity,
Sure.
right? If that then comes through to higher pay for the HVAC electrician, that's a win-win.
Yep. Now, I have a similar example where I want to buy a car which has so many tech, including AI features built into the car, but the salesperson was completely ill-equipped to actually talk to me about those features, which is all, not all, but most of what I cared about. So it's very, you're seeing a lot of this where upskilling is clearly necessary, even on jobs that you think are very interactive, like sales. But let's go back to, I think, how would you summarize the past? Because, equitable advancement isn't always a given. We got it right for the post-World War period for at least 30 years, as you say, but there's social and political forces, so, unions, whatever. What are some of the lessons, like if you were to summarize the past, like what would you say are the punchlines or the learnings we should take away from, let's escape into the Industrial Revolution?
For 10,000 years, VJ, we struggled to allow people to be creative. We had religious restrictions. We had, the emperor had some crazy idea. And then when we finally broke free from those restrictions, because humans want to be creative, right? Humans want to invent stuff. We know that. You have to work very hard, actually, to prevent them from inventing things. But then connecting that invention in the Industrial Revolution to shared prosperity, that was a tough problem that we solved. That problem was solved in the late 19th century. And so if we'd written this book in 1980, it should have been a triumphal book that said, hey, this massive how do you map technology into progress? It's a solved problem in 1980. Unfortunately, 40 years later, we can say that we've gone backwards on the sharing of prosperity, VJ, because the technological transformation and globalization and the ways those combined have hollowed out the middle in this society and actually most other industrial societies. So we've had this, what people call, or David Autor, my colleague at MIT, calls job polarization. People at the top, which is like you and me and probably most people on this video conference, have done well. People in the middle who had some education, some skills, but maybe they didn't finish college, or maybe they only finished college. A lot of these people lost the good jobs that they had previously, got pushed down to the lower end of the job market where they compete with people who have less education, less skills, and that's kept wages down. So we've had this bifurcation, and we haven't shared the prosperity that is potentially available from all technological change. Now, now that we come to AI, if we'd come to AI or something like AI in 1980, we could have said, well, look, we know how to do this. We'll share the prosperity. But we just had 40 years, VJ, where we didn't share the prosperity. Right. And that was 40 years dominated by digital technology. And now we have another digital technology. I think a big leap, but it's definitely digital, right? Yep. A big leap, potentially. What are the odds that we're automatically and naturally going to share the prosperity versus exacerbate or continue our current polarization?
So let's talk about that, because you make a very compelling case in the book. So what changed in this, post 1980? Why did we get it right before? And clearly there's a lot of factors that influence that, but there's some really interesting insights you have in this book about sort of change in compensation for executives and the way we think about this and others. I'll let you speak to it.
Well, I think the decline of trade unions is a big one, VJ. Yep. Remember our story about Henry Ford. The second one is, I think, the organizing principle of American capitalism changed. So I can show you speeches from the 1920s that are all about shareholder capitalism. But in that version of shareholder capitalism, the speakers, who are leading voices of American capitalism, talk about how great the American model is because we pay our workers well, and and we build their skills, and it's that expertise linkage that we were just talking about. That's a really important part in the 1920s of how American industry saw itself and what it saw as its competitive advantages. I think the version of shareholder capitalism that became salient after about 1980 was one which sees workers as a cost to be minimized rather than a resource to be developed. And I think when you put that in this context of the technological transformation and globalization, that doesn't lead to good outcomes for people in the middle of the income distribution.
Yeah, it's a little bit of contradiction in terms. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, so you could say, well, let's just change that, but it's hard to change, right? Because that's where our mindset shifted, and that a lot of policies shifted with it, and you're not going to bring trade unions back, I think, to what they were in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So it's actually pretty difficult to go back to where we were.
But if you look literally in the recent few months, I mean, we've had some sizable gains in wages for the auto workers, and here in Southern California, where our entire community is. I mean, we watch the Screen Actors Guild strike and the writers strike far more closely because many of us know people in that industry. So something changed, at least with these negotiations.
Right. So COVID certainly had an impact. COVID changed availability of labor, and it changed the demand for labor in some ways. And so again, David Autor, my colleague I mentioned previously, is studying and has documented a compression of wages that we've seen in the past couple of years. And if it's the case that now the screenwriters have had a strong union for a long time, as you know, and so have the actors. The UAW has been on the ropes from time to time, so that's a very interesting development. If we see other wage gains and other further resurgence in union activity, that might actually be quite helpful. But remember that if you just raise wages, and that's all you do, you're increasing the incentive to automate and to replace workers with machines, right? So just raising wages is not enough. That's, again, part of why we wrote the book, to explain that point to people and to say, look, you have to redirect technological change. You can't just say, pay everyone a high wage and we're done, because it doesn't work that way. That's not how the market works. But you can change the incentives, change the ideology, change the beliefs, and push technology to be more human complementary. And that is a lot about the people listening to this call. It's a lot about the users. In fact, when you talk to the big tech companies, the ones who run cloud services of various kinds and who give you AI as a service and so on, they say, well, we don't know what the customer wants. We just run the models.
Yeah.
So tell us what you want. So if the customer wants to replace people, that's what you're going to get. If the customer wants to make their people more efficient, more effective, raise customer satisfaction by building and buying human complementary technology, then we're going to get that.
So let's talk quickly about the digital damage chapter in your book, because you start by talking about, and this is something I've also written about, which is the whole hacker ethic, where technology started off as being a very decentralized technology. Actually, at MIT, right? I mean, there was a lot of the hackers originally at MIT, and somehow they migrated west. I'm not quite sure how that happened, but somehow it did. But certainly Boston dominated the early stages of the computer revolution. But that was very much about statements like information wants to be free, very democratized, and then it suddenly seems to have transformed into big tech. People have written about surveillance capitalism and whatever else. So walk us through that sort of transformation there. Like how do we shift from this sort of idealistic set of people with with ideas of utopia, and then all of a sudden we get a very, very different set of outcomes?
Well, it's called capitalism for a reason, Vijay. I mean, people are drawn to make money, and if you offer the prospect of making money, you can attract more capital, and therefore you can invest more, and therefore your model, your ideas of how to run things can become dominant. So, I'm not trying to bash Microsoft by pointing out that they were at the center of this commercialization of software and the shift away from the hacker ethic. I think that's just the reality. And some good things have been built from that, but at the same time, I think the unintended consequence, I don't think this is what Bill Gates was trying to do, but unintended consequences of digital transformation has been a hollowing out of the middle of the income distribution in a way that's proving long lasting and hard to reverse.
Yeah, I think that, and that's one of the things that alarms me the most about this conversation about AI, because this conversation on social media about just leave it to the technology developers, people who are building these technologies. But I'm not always, not at all convinced, frankly, that, first of all, it would be impossible for almost anybody to think through all the consequences of a technology that we barely understand, right? And so who's to know what the second order and third order effects, which can be very large themselves. So what's your best?
I agree with that, Vijay, but I also think when it comes to, is our big core idea that we should replace people with machines. Kurt Vonnegut, Play a Piano would be the book to read on that, right? Written in
I just started reading it after you recommended it.
It's quite brilliant and really sobering. Or are we trying to build technology that helps humans be more effective as humans? I think those are two different paths. I completely agree that the law of unintended consequences often applies. Economists love that. But there's a law of intended consequences too, Vijay, which is
yes.
if you press hard on automation, you're not going to get the human complementary technology. I'm sorry.
No, that's completely true. I would completely agree with that. So let's zero in on that, because this is sort of the audience we're really speaking to. How do we shape AI in a way that is more productive? Like, what are the choices that we can make to have this play out well? And one of the things I always think about is, like, generative AI, in theory at least, seems to be supportive of creators, and AI more broadly supports sort of, it accelerates discovery. We see examples of new drugs, the protein folding problem. There's lots of places where AI is making very positive contributions. And I'm wondering how we can actually, what your insights are about how we can get companies and society to embrace more of these augmentation technologies than the automation technologies. There's always going to be some of both, I mean, without a doubt, right? So
I think the screenwriters argument and what they believe, what I believe they got in their contract is interesting, Vijay, because the screenwriters felt that the big studios wanted to use AI to replace humans.
Mm-hmm.
And an executive would have an idea, tells ChatGPT or whatever, you get a rough script, and then you hire somebody right out of film school to polish it and make it look like a human wrote it, right? That's a screenwriter's nightmare. And so the screenwriters got restrictions on that, and the studios aren't allowed to hollow out the screenwriters in the same way. And the screenwriters are allowed to use AI themselves.
Yes.
Right. So it's a research tool. It's a development tool. That's good. It's an enhancement of what the screenwriters could do. I think the thing that's missing, because it's not exactly the screenwriter's job to ask, I suppose, is, and they're also not technology development people, is they're going to use existing technology. But what you really want to do is develop technology that is going to help people write more effectively in a way that it stays under their control. Right. Now, maybe that's what will happen. However, again, in this group I was working on Monday, there was one executive raised his hand and said, I said, how fast did ChatGPT spread around the world? And we decided it was hours, not days. And this one CEO who's not based in the United States said, as soon as it came out, the next day I fired the people who wrote first drafts for me, because he's in an English, first drafts in English, because he's in a country where English is not the first language. We need to have some materials in English. Now he can get that from ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Right. Immediately from ChatGPT. So there's a speed of adjustment issue, and there's a question of what is this technology for? How do we use it? And what's the reinforcement, if you like, in the business model there? And I think that it depends. It depends on how the people, like the people on this call, how they see the world, what they think is important, what they push for. I think this choice rests with a lot of people, not just with. It obviously rests a bit with Google and Microsoft and Amazon, but I think it rests a lot more with users, as in people who use technology, people who apply technology to business problems, people who say, oh, you know what, we could do better than our competitors if we go this way rather than that way. That's the thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of decisions I think that we're going to see over the next couple of years, Vijay, how that plays out.
And AI, and particularly generative AI, is the general purpose technology. And so there's a lot to your point about how we deploy it, because it can be used in a variety of different ways. And the ways I use it, actually, to your point, and I'm not replacing any workers, because we're academics, we don't really, but we, clearly we are finding ways to enhance our creativity and things like that. summarize research articles, whatever the case might be. Very, it certainly makes us more efficient, and I think helps us discover new ideas, hopefully. So I think there is a very important piece of that perhaps wasn't there with the traditional forms of automation that we saw, from 1980 to 20, whatever, perhaps. Because there's much more leeway that we have in how we deploy the technology versus a tool that somebody else gives us. With Microsoft's new plan to give Copilot to the Office, add Copilot to the Office suite for $30 per month, minimum buy is 300 users, I read. That's sort of hopefully an important way to think about it, or an important way to deploy it is perhaps a better way to say it.
Yeah, look, the one big transformation in American society that came along with the auto industry, it wasn't only in the auto industry, but it was that period, was development of what people have called the manager engineer. So
Yep.
the professionalization of management and the application of scientific method broadly defined to management problems. Operations research obviously comes out of that, for example. And I think that set of people, so that's sort of they're the unsung heroes of the modernization and the shared prosperity of the 20th century. And I think people like that today, we call them technologists or CTOs, or the people who work for the CTO, they are incredibly important, and AI has a lot of potential that they will determine which direction it goes in. We're making the argument that from a social point of view and a macroeconomic point of view, it'd be better if it was human augmenting. But I think from a commercial point of view, in many instances, that's also a very appealing route to take.
Absolutely. And, sort of the conceptual point in what I hear you talk about here is probably too high level, but we're really investing in human capital. And, these during the growth of the auto industry, it was a whole new class of managers and engineers and designers who came to work. So all these white collar jobs were created. And of course, with further training as well. And I think we should be asking those questions about what's the sort of the analogy here, like what should we be investing in today? One of the things that worries me, of course, is that generative AI, or actually AI more broadly, really targets human intelligence, or at least tries, so that's very central to what all of us bring to the table when we go to work and so on. So there's a concern there. But I want to close with this, and then we'll open it up to the audience. You talk about machine intelligence versus machine usefulness, and I think that framing is really important for people to understand, which is you can build AI for machine intelligence, or you can build AI to sort of be useful to humans. Walk us through that sort of framework that you've got.
Yeah, so I think, well, as you know, Vijay, both ideas are present in the modern history of computer science since the 1940s. Eric Brynjolfsson calls it the Turing trap, the idea that you can have a Turing, let's make a computer that can fool you into thinking it's a human. Let's make a computer that can beat humans at chess, or match human skill at chess, match human skill at Go, and then run a self-checkout kiosk.
Right.
You're just replacing the human there with a machine. It's an impressive achievement, but the self-checkout kiosk doesn't raise productivity. It shifts the work onto the customer, for which you're not paid. It doesn't raise the wages of the people staying behind in the grocery store. It doesn't generally increase the output or the sales of the grocery store. It does make the remaining workers, I think, more afraid they could lose their job. Mm-hmm. Some people lost their jobs to the self-checkout kiosks. That's one route. That's the machine intelligence route, and that I think has become the dominant philosophy, honestly, in a big part of the computer industry, in the computer science business, including academics and in industry. The machine usefulness has long antecedents also. Doug Engelbart's famous mother of all presentations was about how you could, that the mouse and other technology to make humans more productive, make it easier for humans to use computers. So we've had those ideas for a long time, and there are people who are interested in developing it. And we're not inventing this from zero, but it's not the dominant philosophy, and it's not what's driving the business, and it's not where people think the money is, at least not now. But so why not push to make teachers more effective, or to deliver healthcare better, or to improve the efficiency or the effectiveness, the productivity of those blue collar workers, modern crafts, people call them, electricians, plumbers, and so on, who are dealing with technology and struggle with it sometimes. It seems to us there's a lot of opportunity there, but those are not seen as the primary attractive technical targets and commercial targets.
In fact, your colleague David Otter, when I read his interview with the Financial Times, argues that healthcare should probably be one of the first sectors we target because there's a clear shortage of workers there. So anything we can do to augment the workforce there is particularly important. Let's switch to the comments or the questions, I should say. So we have a question from Isabella Davidson, which is, how can we prevent people from being left behind who live in Rust Belt-like areas in which there is not much technological innovation benefiting the community?
Well, I wrote another book on that topic, Isabella, called Jumpstarting America, which came out about 4 years ago, arguing that we should increase federal spending on R&D and spread around the country and build more tech hubs, not trying to build more Silicon Valleys, that won't work, but build more hubs specialized on particular pieces of technology, aspects of technology. And that's got a fair amount of traction. And there's a lot of interest in the Chips and Science Act has some of those ideas in it. That's encouraging. And I do think that AI can be developed and deployed anywhere. I think this is the advantage of digital technology. So if you line that up, there is a tendency in this country and in other countries, sort of a winner take all geographically. And there's a number of problems that come with that, including if you're prosperous parts of California, you don't like to build more housing. Yep. It gets pretty expensive to live there, right? See the Bay Area, for example. So spreading the ideas around, encouraging the science and technologists to live in a wider set of places, backing that up with federal R&D and opportunities to commercialize, I think that makes a lot of sense. And it deals with the social and geographic polarization also.
Yeah, and we saw the recent initiative to support tech centers in sort of the non-coastal region. So there are things that I suspect the government can do.
Well, that was our idea, Vijay. That's what we were pushing for.
Oh, congratulations. Well done.
And honestly, the book received a warm but not enthusiastic reception before COVID. And then COVID woke everybody up to the fact that science is amazingly valuable, not just for the things that you need to invent, like better treatments for cancer, but also for the disasters you don't know, you don't anticipate, like a virus that's going to kill and hurt a lot of people. mRNA vaccines came out of a redeployment of scientific talent and capacity, right?
And actually, there's a big AI story at Moderna, for example. So it's here's a question that I think you talk about, and Justin Early talks about. Your excellent book concludes with the call to use technology to enhance rather than replace human workers, but Friedman School managers are ultimately only convinced by maximizing returns. Can you point to evidence that shows enhancing humans will make firms more money than replacing humans?
Yeah, look, I think it's a very good question. And if we had 10 studies on that, I think we'd be on our way. We have one study right now, a really good one by Eric Brynjolfsson and Danielle Lee, that looks at customer service. I mentioned this before, so that if you provide the customer service reps with an AI assistant in a way that's relevant to the problems that they're encountering, the less experienced people become better at what they're doing, and that's good for their ability to answer questions. It's good for their job satisfaction, and the customers, because there's a company providing some sort of technical advice to customers, are also happier. So that is encouraging. It's only one study, but this is something that we at MIT have a center looking at exactly this, and other people have centers too. So I think there's a race to study and understand when and how exactly the technology can be complementary to humans in ways that increase profits, because that will, I completely agree, that will help persuade a lot of people.
Yeah, at our recent conference, I can't believe how quickly their academic field, we're often accused of being slow, have pivoted. I mean, there were so many studies on generative AI and its impact, not necessarily on profitability, but certainly productivity in many different.
We're having a massive AI jamboree at MIT for 3 days at the end of November, Vijay. And, it seems to me like half the faculty are lined up to present all kinds of crazy stuff, right? Which tells you, to your point, it's a general purpose technology, and people have got a lot of general purposes.
Exactly. And yeah, so that's sort of what keeps me optimistic. Deepan Bundy, in the initial periods, is it possible that people with generative AI skill sets will demand higher wages?
Yes, presumably. So what you should do is help more people get the right skill set and figure out how AI can do that. So bringing AI to education, Vijay. We've talked about transforming education a lot. It was actually one of Isaac Asimov's favorite ideas, by the
Yes.
way. But we've not really done it. But if AI has the potential, we already have digital distribution. We already, every person, every blue collar worker who's got an idle moment, they're on their phone,
Yep.
right? So what are they studying? What I think they're studying TikTok right now. But what could they be learning? How could that become AI skills? That's a fantastic. Oh, profit opportunities. Back to the previous question. That's a really big one. I think if you can figure out how to help people teach themselves skills in an enjoyable way, in a fun way, in a way they can monetize.
Okay, so to the entrepreneurs in the audience, AI, teach AI via TikTok, and there's a fortune to be made, right?
Well,
Um,
yeah, that might be a stretch, but yes, absolutely. That's why they're entrepreneurs, Vijay, and you and I are
You'll be
entrepreneurs.
surprised what these kids can do these days and teach, there's a TikTok video for almost anything, it seems. Nancy Kim Yun, as organizations deploy AI tech, what are some key questions that need to be asked and discussed to make intentional decisions around augmentation versus automation?
I think the question is, are we firing people? Why are we firing people? Can't we redeploy them? Can't we upskill them? If we make a commitment not to fire them, what would that mean? What would that force us to do? I mean, look, every company is different, and you notice in the book we're not saying don't fire people. I mean,
Right.
sometimes that's what the commercial logic requires. But I think asking yourself, what do we do? What are our human resources? How do we improve them? Aren't our people a source of competitive advantage? And then can we use AI or find AI or encourage someone else to develop AI that we'll buy that enhances what our people can do? I think those are the right questions.
No, and I think one of the things you say in the book, which I thought was really important, and sort of I've had this thought as well, which is if you just use generative AI trained on models that OpenAI or others have trained the same corpora of data, we're all going to there's going to be some sort of mean reversion. So it really needs to be about finding what the source of our competitive advantage is and how we leverage that with proprietary data or proprietary intellectual property, and then sort of let these machines run wild on sort of finding patterns that humans may not be able to spot, for example, suggest new ideas.
Yes, but make sure that whatever AI you're using cannot exfiltrate your human insight,
Yes.
right? Because that's super. So protecting your IP, I think we're all much more. And I think there will be legislation on this actually, Vijay, because I think it's inappropriate to steal people's ideas without permission. So I think we've all suddenly realized that even relatively small ideas can run off and be combined with other ideas and create value for someone else. I think that, but in a corporate setting, you have to be super careful, I think, about
Yes.
not letting anything you have that's a differentiator, because if it gets out there and gets smushed in with everyone else's, that's part of that you're just accelerating the mean reversion problem.
Yeah, this came up at our annual conference, and one of the things the executive, I won't name the company, actually said was, they finally did a deal with some of these generative AI companies because they wanted to get an overarching license for use by a very large number of people at their company, but you can't expect individuals to be that careful, especially if you're dealing in trade secrets or you're a government contractor, whatever the case might be. So I think that will happen because I think that will get stipulated by the customer. Josh Chiang, how do you see AI and generative AI helping improve our approach to climate change? And the second part is provocative, and building regenerative systems of being. And I think I know I'm not sure I know what that means, but I think it's living forever, maybe.
um, so So you should come to the MIT Jamboree because we have a half day on AI and the planet, and I plan to attend and learn from that also. I think that the really good thing here, and the piece that people I think have already grasped is that if you're deliberate and you say, look, here's the social problems I want to actually address, and I want to mobilize knowledge and apply certainly all of human understanding. Um, you can improve, you can help doctors um, diagnose patients better. You can help understand complex systems like the planetary level. So I think that that's not the worry. The new knowledge, as you said, Vijay, will come to us through this, right? New scientific knowledge. Some of that scientific knowledge, by the way, will extend lives, sure. Although, the big problem we have with life expectancy in the US, I would submit, is inequality of outcomes. I mean, our average life expectancy is not very high and not impressive compared to other countries, primarily because so many people have really low life expectancy. Most people on this call, I think, have actually quite high life expectancy. You can check that with your actuary. But I think that being deliberate, having social goals, let's improve education, let's deal with climate change, let's find a better solution. Not all solutions are amenable to purely technological solutions, but it certainly can be helpful for some problems like that. But let's also pay attention to the job implications and the workforce implications, because it's not a big enough, right now, it's not a big enough productivity increase for everyone to sit back and get paid, get a check from the government for the rest of their lives. And I also think, Vijay, people like to work. I think work, obviously some jobs are very hard, and replacing certain jobs with machines is totally fine with me. But with jobs comes identity and a sense of purpose and a belonging to the community. And I think that's also the point of the question about the Midwest, right? When whole regions have been left behind, that's been really demoralizing to and alienating to a lot of people. And that is avoidable. So let's avoid it.
Good. To your point about health equity, I just read a statistic where at one particular hospital in a suburb of Chicago, the difference in life expectancy between two zip codes that are served by the same hospital is 18 years.
Right.
So, I mean, that's ridiculous. It was basically saying north of the hospital, you live 18 years longer than if you live south of the hospital. I just made the directions up, but something roughly like that. And that's a scary thought when you think about how much disparity there can be in things.
So you could apply technology, including AI, to that problem, Vijay. But I think we all know what the problem is, right? And the problem is not at its foundation technological, it's social, and it's deep rooted.
Yeah.
Well, let's not kid ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Raghavendra Unichi says, do you see any way to build the mindset of machine usefulness before capitalism exploits sort of the argument towards automation? Like, I guess the question is, how do you raise the awareness? Does regulation help, and how does the regulation need to evolve?
Yeah, so we're not proponents of some heavy-handed government regulation approach. I don't think that would work here. And also, I can tell you, in Washington, D.C., where I spend a lot of time, if you bring up regulation of AI, a member of staff at the back of the room says, China, behind their hand, right? Meaning, if you disadvantage our industry, China will get some.
Exactly.
I don't know if that's true. I think it's exaggerated, to be honest, but it is a consideration. So I think that persuading people and making this argument and having this argument in public, I think that's a big strength of our democracy. And I think the fact that people like you will sit for an hour of Vijay and me batting these ideas back and forth is extremely encouraging. And then thinking about how to apply this, and then finding, I think part of our job is to find leading examples, Vijay, people who choose to do this, people who do well by doing good, and actually helping to make them prominent, explain how that worked, and so on and so forth. That's very helpful, I think, at this stage, because this is a technology. This is a fork in a road.
Yeah, no, and it's one of the reasons I was so eager to feature you, because we're all grappling with this, and anything we can do to inform this debate or this discussion. Our goal is really to elevate the conversation, because all these people are going to go back to their companies and sort of hopefully be a little more informed than they were an hour ago about some of the choices.
And let me reinforce the point you made at the beginning, Vijay. It's a national debate, it's an international debate. So Senator Schumer is running a bipartisan process in the Senate to deal with these issues. The White House has thrown some cards on the table, and there's going to be a number of reports and studies, and hopefully pushback from other people. That's healthy. And there's this meeting in Bletchley Park that you mentioned. Bletchley Park, as everyone remembers, is the code-breaking center that the British had during World War II. So it's an international meeting to talk about safety of AI, okay, which can mean a lot of things. But I think the point is, Vijay, people are grappling with what is this technology? What could it do? What damage could it do? And obviously, there are safety issues and other things like who gets their hands on nuclear weapons and so on. But I think safety in national security to us runs a lot through workforce. Like, are we creating good jobs? Do we continue to create good jobs? Do we create more good jobs? Do we create more good jobs for everyone? That is a fundamental requirement and expectation of any society, including this one. And if you fail to deliver on that for 10, 20, 30 years, you will get a backlash.
Yes, and it's already happening at some level. No, I think this is something that it's a really important set of issues to address. And, we're at the point in the evolution of AI where we're still early stages. And, yes, there's some stakes on the ground and so on, but I think it's not too late to make a meaningful difference now. So I've got a couple more questions. This one's a little bit not directly related to what we talk about, but what do you think about the AI applications in the military, automating drones to fight wars in distant locations, things like that?
Well, I think that's part of what the Bletchley Park conversation is about, Vijay, which is taking humans out of the loop could obviously have very bad repercussions. But what does it mean to have a human in the loop? How much human decision making do you have there? How fast can the humans make decisions relative to the machines? And I think we are seeing some things in Ukraine in terms of the next generation of technology applied to military that make us realize this is coming pretty quickly, right? So unfortunately, the long history of military technology is once you've invented it, you can't uninvent it. And once you've invented it, everyone can get their hands on it pretty quickly. Actually, it's remarkable that nuclear weapons haven't spread more widely over the past 60 years. So that was non-proliferation was a surprisingly successful approach. But I think that you need to invest because other people are investing and people who wish you ill are investing. So you can't avoid it, right? It's one of the more difficult aspects of human grappling with technology.
So let me close with this. So if we were to get the change you're advocating for, what would it look like?
Wage compression. That job polarization that David Autor will get his Nobel Prize for, I think one day, studying that and explaining that. The middle will come back, Vijay. Renewal of the middle in terms of income, opportunities, what it really means to be middle class. That is the ultimate metric.
And I think that is really, really worth equal. Like, it's like ultimately one of the things I always sort of think about is like, who are we doing all of this for, right? And it's ultimately to build a healthy society, a healthy country, and sort of that we
right. But just one last thought on that, Vijay, which is what about the rest of the world? So we're 330 million people, pretty innovative society. We've done well. We've got some bumps in the road. We can deal with them. In a world of 8 billion that will become a world of 10 to 12 billion, what jobs are they going to have? Yes, how much money do they make? And how does that impact the planet? Those are the really big questions.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right about that, because a lot of the things that generative AI does actually takes away these outsourced jobs in India and the Philippines and places like that, right? And so there's going to be, on the other end, we can export know-how, hopefully, if they have the right institutional systems. So fingers crossed. But again, thank you very much for spending an hour with us. We really appreciate you taking the time, but these were an absolutely fabulous set of insights. And I don't know if you can see this, but maybe you can actually. So this is the book. Buy the book. It's available at your favorite bookseller and on Amazon, of course. But I urge you to read it. It's an absolute excellent. It's just a wonderful book. Will really make you much better informed to participate in this debate about technology and prosperity. And again, to all of the audience, thank you so much for spending an hour with us. Thank you to our sponsors, KPMG and the Beal Family Foundation. Thank you for paying close attention. I can't see you, so I hope you're paying close attention. And most of all, thank you to Simon Johnson for spending this hour with us. Really, really enjoyed the conversation. And hopefully the book has the impact on our society that you hope it does. And we certainly hope it does too. So thank you again.
Thank you, Vijay. Thank you very much indeed.